You are listening to TAP Therapeutic Astrology Podcast, and today we are honored to be together with Elizabeth Ferreira. Welcome. You are a therapist and you are a witch.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and you are also a podcaster. Exactly about that. My therapist is a witch is the name, and I accidentally took an overdose of that podcast last Saturday for reasons that our listeners will or will not know, but I can actually really recommend it because I felt so much better afterwards, and I felt pretty good during. I felt really included, and like all the sides of me that normally would not be acceptable was okay. And plus, you learn a lot when you hear podcasts. So I'll recommend that. But so you have a master's in somatic psychology, and I was gonna put in this presentation of you, I was gonna put in this sentence, and it seems like your work centers around. But then I had a look at your Instagram. I was like, what does it center around? I'm like, the body, the unconscious. That's what I thought of first. But then there's so many other topics. But I've come up with this, and we'll see what you say about it. Can we say that your work centers around managing emotional challenges?
Part of it, yeah.
Part of it.
For sure.
Can you say some more about what is it that you do?
Yeah. Well, I think what I do is complex. So it's a little difficult to wrap it up in a nice bow. But what I feel is it's about guiding people back home to themselves. So creating a space and a way of observing who we are so that we can let go of all the story or how we're supposed to be, like you said earlier, allowing all of us to show up instead of having to, oh, only this much of me can be here. And, oh, maybe that witchy side can't come out in this space. And I am still struggling a little bit with that word therapist because I think deep down my bones really don't know what the hell that word means. And so I think of myself more as a guide.
Okay.
Yeah. And within that space, we're learning emotional regulation. We're learning how to listen to the language of the body. We're learning how to be more at ease in a world that is rough and hard. So yeah, to me, and my work is about, there's all these like little elements. Like the image I get is like there's all these kind of bottles on the shelf, and it's like, okay, what kind of mixture or pieces do you need? And we'll figure that out together.
Sounds like a witch.
Yeah. Yep.
And Elizabeth, I've been here in my mind a few times, sitting here with you, and apart from that, saying something about how the mind works, and past, present, and future, but also I just thought, I had this image that we could, because I feel I know your vibe from listening to you in your podcast, then maybe here in the beginning we could say something about our intention for this conversation. And for me, I also like to just say something, what's my fear around it? Do you want to start, or should I start?
Why don't you start? You go first.
Okay. Okay. Well, a fear is, I do have a lot of fire in my chart. So when I'm excited about something, that fire can be difficult to manage that fire. And it comes out, of course, as excitement. It can be, but blended with some nervousness, and that can build tension. So right now I'm not feeling horribly or tremendously nervous. Like I'm just, everything is tightening up. I feel good. But I'm happy. I'm maybe a little bit too happy. And that's, it's actually something that you spoke about in one of your videos, is around that, it is something around people who are too excited. I don't know if you remember this, because this is also years back that you've made this. But yeah, what do you think about that? The whole, that excitement can, it's a good thing, but it can actually hinder you in also being receptive and being present.
Well, I would ask, where do you feel that fire in your body?
It's like from my waist up, actually. I think mostly.
Mhm. Mhm. I would say that for me, at least, what comes to mind is that fire can also be that creative force. Like there's a lot of energy to that energy. There's a lot of force, push out. And so for me, I think about it's not maybe diminishing it or making it wrong or being like there's too much excitement or happiness here. I'm like, bring it on. Let's build a bonfire together. Let's
Okay.
go.
Okay.
And maybe feeling like you don't have to be the only one trying to contain it. Like it gets to live all the way out into this space we're co-creating together.
That is some good images. I like that. Bonfire, and that we're holding that together. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
that helps. So, but other than that, my intention is to have a really chill conversation with you where we go deep, because that's the only thing that's meaningful to me is
Mm-hmm.
when we allow the topic to go deep. And yeah, so I'm really looking forward to hearing you speak more about what you do, and your journey with witchcraft. So that's me. Do you want to say about your intention and maybe some fears around it, if you have any?
Yeah, yeah. So I actually took some time before we logged on to set a few intentions. And my first intention was to be heart open. And I think that is the way into depth. So for me, my intention is to be open and soft and to not just listen to your questions or the conversation, but to feel it and to feel liberated to bring the feeling space in here. Um, and equally, I'm a fiery person.
Yes, you are.
So I guess for me, my fear, and I don't know if it's a fear, it's just more I'm already feeling that energy, that like, So I'm excited. I'm really interested. And I think sometimes for me, there's a speed to that energy that can take me out of my embodiment. Like to me, embodiment is much slower. So maybe it's not so much a fear, but just a practice of slowing down, like allowing for there to be speed, but then slowing down to return to the body.
Yeah, I mean, it even helped with the speed, because that is exactly it. That it is my life experience that it can hinder me sometimes when it rises to a too high level, so that it goes too fast, and it's hard to be really present and embodied. But even when you said that we contain it together, that helped me.
Mhm,
That image.
mhm, mhm. We get to be, two fire beings just
Yeah.
existing.
Yeah. So do you remember even that video where you talked about that it could be too much with excitement? Do you remember what I'm referring to?
Mhm, mhm,
What was that
mhm.
about?
So this is kind of moving into a branch of my work, which is trauma work. And I really view trauma as it's a wounding that happens to our soul where we become disconnected from ourselves. And within that, there is the mental space of it, and there's also the somatic physical space of trauma. And I would even maybe dare to say that trauma is always a physiological experience, even if it's emotional trauma or spiritual trauma, it always has a physical impact on us. And so within that space, sometimes when we've experienced trauma, that the sensations we associate with excitement, right? Like there's a speed, energy kind of rises up into the body. We can kind of talk a little bit faster. Our movements kind of shift into a way that can, to a traumatized body, feel like fight or flight. So as we're healing and we're returning to ourselves, sometimes that excitement, our body registers it as threat. So it's about reintegrating that story that it's okay to be excited, it's safe to be excited. These feelings that are very somatically similar to stress and anxiety and fear are actually a good thing.
Right. And when you say that, I come to think that it's also an anger energy. I mean, yeah, that's the layers of different an energy that can be transformed into a positive or negative version
Mm-hmm.
of itself. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Um, so I have questions for you, but let me know every time if you notice it, that I'm speeding. Okay, just
Mm-hmm.
you can make a signal for me, just like
Okay, I got you.
time out, man. Slow time down.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because I really do want to get to the witch part,
Mm-hmm.
and I hope it's okay that I ask broadly in the beginning, like what is it you mean by witch? Because I think it is an umbrella term for many of us that where there's a whole pantheon of meaning to that. And I know that for you it started as a child, and you can start there. You could, I don't know how you if you have a definition for witchcraft or so, but if I ask you what is it? What is being a
Mm-hmm.
witch? What would you say? That is what I'm asking. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So for me, the word witch equates to wise and weird, like someone that is not conforming to normal society structures, a person who kind of has a sense of another way of being, whether that's a sensitivity to another realm, another world, sensitivity to here. And it's also a sensitivity to the realms of magic and kind of understanding how we're spiritual beings having a human experience. And I practice both physical witchcraft and more what I call kind of psychological witchcraft. So I do cast spells, I do rituals, I manifest, I change things, so to speak. And I also use it to work with my psyche, going into, the underworld of myself and going to places that are not accessible without that kind of wisdom, weird, witchy space.
Right. So it's so you think it's actually not accessible. It's not like there are different roads to it. It's actually not accessible if you're not open to something that's, like you said, it's very different from what's consensus.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think that it's about being open. Like we can't go to a place we're not open to. And kind of the way my practice has evolved is it's about challenging beliefs. So it becomes a question of what if I believed that this was true? what starts to happen inside of me, what starts to happen to my life when I practice believing that. And then what happens when I practice not believing it, when I'm like, maybe it's not true. And then taking in that observation of how does my life change? How does my internal state change with that? And, I think we can get really stuck in the analyzer part of our mind that therefore can limit the experiences that we can have when we bring in that more magical type of thinking, when we bring in that imagination, that more childlike wonder. So instead of listening to what other people believe or say is true, we're opening that wonderment to be like, well, what feels good to me to believe or feel is true?
I have so many questions when you speak like that, but let me try to stay on the thread here. So, what is it that is being opened to?
To me, it's the curiosity of the inner world versus the outer world. So um, the psychological forces inside of us, and then the physical forces that exist outside of our body. So, what I mean by that, and I kind of think about this in more terms of images and metaphors, so I'm just going to go with that for now. Like, I think about the concept of demons, right? And what if a demon internally within a psychological lens was a piece of our ego, you know, the attachment to being an angry person. And therefore, the more we feed into that energy, it actually harms ourselves in some way. Or it feeds that wrath. And maybe for some people, that's actually a good thing. They get a lot of empowerment from that place. And then it's about, okay, that's like the internal kind of realm of it. Like, how does this idea or concept land inside my body? Where does it go? Where does it feel true for me? And then it's kind of about, okay, now can you see that outside of yourself? Whether it's seeing it in other people or seeing that energy just kind of being in an atmosphere or a group, right? So, for example, using this analogy of like anger as kind of a demon or an energy, right? Internally, if I feed that, if I really allow myself to really ruminate and be angry and meditate on that anger and rage and all that, in some ways I can make it stronger inside of myself. Maybe start to become identified with it. I'm an angry person, right? I get a lot of attachment when people challenge my anger. I get reactive and I kind of explode, right? I feel like, oh, don't take this away from me. And then externally, you can see it, in communities where there's almost this hierarchy of being an angry person, or where places where anger is really valued or viewed as that's just how we interact with each other. And so I think using more of a spiritual lens or more of that kind of magical space, it gives us a lot of autonomy and it gives us a lot of power because now we're at choice. I don't have to keep feeding this fear or this anger. I don't have to keep participating in situations where that anger is really demanded. What happens if I start feeding another part of myself, another spirit, another demon, another whatever you want to label it? So that's kind of how I think about it.
Okay, so I'm curious to, because you mentioned that it was a metaphor. So do you see it as metaphors for something that you can work actively with in therapy, or do you see it as something real, if you excuse that division of real and unreal,
Mm-hmm.
but but just do you see it as actually energy? Because I think the first part when you were speaking, I got the sense that you were speaking about sensing energy.
Mm-hmm.
Is that true? Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're picking that up. I think when we boil everything down, right, to its actual essence, it's all energy.
Mm.
It's all energy, it's all force, right? And our mind really likes to label things. Like our mind is built to try to put it in a pretty box so that we feel like we understand it, but we don't most of the time. But there is a part of us that can feel into these spaces. So I think that it is real, that the forces that are behind the words that people use are real,
Mm.
and that we can feel them. And that when we keep our mind open or we practice, what if it's true? What if it is real? It can increase our sensitivity to those energies, those forces that as human beings, we've been trying to figure out how to talk about them because it's so difficult to talk about.
Yes, and I'm so happy that we are talking about it. And I just okay, okay. What I want to ask you is, what is? Can you say something really controversial? So I know that this is witchcraft, and so my mind is not kind of categorizing in the same
Mm-hmm.
as therapy. But whereas like this is witchcraft, this is magic, this is what you can only access. Yeah, like you explained, if you go to that place.
Mm.
Because for me, I mean, all of what you've said, it sounds so normal and regular. So what is the witchy part, if that's even answerable?
I feel into that question. What comes to mind is when you move into a deep practice with yourself, that your edges can get very thin. And you realize that there is very little separation between you and everything else. And when you can feel into that space, you can make things happen because you relax yourself. When you allow yourself to change and transform, then you start to see that externally. It happens outside of yourself. And to me, that is magic. That is that thing that you'll have this experience. And I think it's different for everybody, but you have this experience of feeling into something greater than yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And then because of that, you feel into your own power to change things, to kind of take these threads and weave them together in a way that you want or you desire. And there's a flexibility because it's not like, you do this and then the next day you have millions of dollars, or the next day, you know, you're healed or whatever. It's a process. And the more open you are, the more you weave those threads together, you set that intention, and you just kind of sit back while watching it. You kind of start to see these threads that you put together maybe 6 months ago or a year ago are now starting to come together. And you're like, whoa, okay, this is kind of cool. I guess this is working. And then you keep going and you keep going. And so, like, kind of just a small little example, kind of for myself. was that I felt called around this time or so last year to kind of lean into a deeper place of my practice. And I set that intention. I kind of weaved that together. I did it in my way. And I started getting these really bizarre synchronicities start to happen. Where one day I'm walking to this trail that I like to go to, and I just had a lot of fear of like I was going to run across a snake. I was like, wait a minute, why is this happening? And I just was like, you know what? No, I've never done that before, whatever. And I turn around the corner and there's a dead rattlesnake that had been squashed by a tire.
Oh,
And I was like, okay. And then I'm still outside walking around and I saw like several black dogs. And I live in an area where there are not many black dogs. They're all like golden retriever types. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. And then, without any prompting, I started kind of just getting a lot of material on a certain deity, right? Like kind of on my social media or things. And I ended up having kind of a dream where I was this black dog, and I
whoa.
kind of walked up to behind this kind of chair and I never looked at the person, but I could tell it was a female hand. And I just sat there and there were a few other things that happened, but it was so vivid and real that then it pushed me into leaning into the practice that I have now. And so that's kind of the things that will start to happen where there's just too many things that start to kind of line up that you're like, okay, this is not just chaos and this is not just me imagining it. There are now these like physical manifestations starting to present themselves externally.
I love that answer. I love that answer, and I love the way that you speak. And it's really what I've been looking so much forward to, because you take those breaks, and I think for you it's just natural. But for me, it's like really inspiring that you have that courage to stop. And I'm not sure what you're doing, but I'm thinking like you're sensing in somehow, right? And you're sensing in, and then the words come. So even just the way that you speak is so inspiring. But it is a good answer to show, okay, so it's not just that we can call it demons, we can call it all sorts of psychological character categories, but it's actually a way of living open to the subtle influences that are always there. Yeah.
Mhm. And I would just say that I really come from a place where there's no right or wrong way to be a witch or to lean into a magical practice. And I don't negate people who have had like very real experiences that are very difficult to talk about or describe. And, the way that I talk about it, I think there's always a piece of the magical realm that is sacred, and that's sacred to each individual. And so I intentionally try to speak in a way that allows everybody to be right. Because I don't know, I'm just experiencing one little piece of it, and
Yeah,
I'm still learning, I'm still growing. And
of
maybe,
course.
I don't know, maybe we talk again in a couple of years and I'm like, demons are real.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And I even felt that when you talked about your personal practice, that's not. I felt, yeah, I should probably not ask what that is, because that seemed private, right? So
Mhm,
so in that way, yeah, it's sacred, and it's very subjective and private. What it is that you do.
mhm, mhm.
So you've had these sensitivities since you were a child
Mm-hmm.
is your story.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning that you could, I mean, for me, that at least it tells me, okay, so probably you've experienced this in other lives as well. And so you come in with these sensitivities, and yet it that there's something that blocks you until where you are now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Can you share what happened?
So I was born into a very strict Christian community. It borderlined on culty, like a cult. They there was this idea of how you're supposed to dress, how you're supposed to eat, um, very strict rules around what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. And so within that space, there was this story that was told that if anything comes to you, right? Like if you can hear a voice or you see a spirit or whatever, it's not good. It's not God. It's always going to be the devil coming to tempt you. So here I was, this very sensitive kid, and I used to be utterly petrified of going to bed at night. And I would see what I come to learn are shadow people. And I saw, this is many people have talked about this, but I would see what they call the hat man. I think it's what it's called. It's like a shadowy figure with a hat and no feet, and felt very male in presence. And he would stand kind of by my bedroom door, just standing there staring. And it would terrify me. And I remember being a kid and, being in that Christian, context, you're taught to try to pray it away,
Yeah,
like say, get thee behind me, Satan, push it away and all that.
yeah.
And I would hear stories of other people who had seen spirits, like when there's one story of a woman who my parents spent a lot of time with. Her husband had passed away and she was in grief. And she said that she saw him after he passed away standing in her hallway. She said it even smelled like him. And she, said, get thee behind me, Satan, and cut off her grief because she realized what she thought was like, oh, I'm grieving so much. So I'm calling in the devil to come and tempt me.
Yeah.
So I heard those types of stories. And I just kind of, for a time, kept it all inside of myself. I didn't dare tell anybody what I was noticing, what I was seeing. And I, kind of just like would close my eyes. I would stop acknowledging that I could see it. I would ignore it. I got to a place where I would just put on music when I would go to bed as a kid to try to drown it all out. And then I got to a place where I got so good at pretending it wasn't there that then I stopped noticing it.
Do you remember what age you were at that when you made that decision of blocking it
I,
out?
th- I think I was around maybe 7 or 8 years old.
And but you can remember it,
Mm-hmm.
sort of, yeah. Mm.
Yeah, like, I think it's terrifying when you have these sensitivities and there's nobody there to help you with it. So they really land and stay these really sharp memories because there was such fear attached to them.
Right, right, of course, yeah. Yeah, it's always the negative that stays with us.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really beneficial now that you can remember, so you can like piece this together that you couldn't as a child. And I'm really saddened by the story, and I'm also relating to it from a personal place of having been in a religious background. And stories just yeah, it was just really supposed to scare you, those stories that we heard. And at that time, I also took it as the truth. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
that's just what you do. I mean, some kids are critical, but I was not. I was just convinced that all of that was the devil. Whatever we would hear about the devil, bad, evil demons, right?
Mm-hmm.
But so, what happened? At what point did you start questioning that learning?
Mm-hmm. So I think around my teenage years, my parents had really relaxed on the Christianity thing. And I was finally at a place where I just didn't believe it anymore. I mean, some of the most evil people I've ever experienced were in a church, like awful, awful people.
Yeah.
And I just remember kind of looking around going, what hypocrites?
Yeah.
Like, all these people are nasty and mean and judgmental and threatening. You're going to go to hell if you don't do what I say. And so I just removed myself from that space and community. And for a long time, I really didn't have any spiritual practice or connection. I just was, kind of being free, living my life at the time. I was going to college. I got really into dancing and acting and being a performer. And that felt just like so good, like what my body needed, to just liberate myself from all of these cages that had been put onto me. But there was always this feeling inside of me of emptiness, of something missing. And what ended up happening for me was ironically through dance. I found myself in this middle of nowhere place in a yurt with a shaman. And the shaman told me, you are a medicine woman and you have big medicine to give.
Wow, 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 wow.
And it was like something broke open inside of me because I had never been seen before in my
Yeah.
life. And during that stay where I was, I think we had a couple nights of doing ceremony. And the second night, what feels true to me was I saw like all the spirits of the land that was there, just like these spirits that were just like standing around staring at me. And I re experienced that same fear I felt as a kid.
I understand. Yeah.
Um, but that was the catalyst point. That was the moment where I was like, okay, like I cannot ignore this anymore. Like something has been broken open inside of me, and there's no closing that door anymore.
Okay, so let me ask a little bit about that. So you started by saying that it was through dance, ironically, meaning because you weren't allowed to dance in church. Is that what you meant?
Yep,
Okay,
yep.
got that. And then you all of a sudden you're with a shaman dancing, or what? What is the link from dancing to the shaman?
So I had entered a community of dancers, and I had built a new kind of friendships and community. And through them, I was taken to that place. So, in a way, I was simply following what felt good to me. Because at the time, it just felt good to dance. It felt good to be with these people. And then I ended up there, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I had no idea what was going to happen. I just was following my bliss. And then by kind of following that image, boom, I got placed right in front of a shaman and seen through.
That's so amazing. And what age were you there?
I was, I think, mid-20s,
Okay.
around there.
Okay. And so, because one thing is then you are seen, you have this opening, but then I assume you have to go back into whatever everyday life you had. So
Mm-hmm.
what happened there in your everyday setting when you had opened up these sensitivities again?
Um, well, at first I felt like I had one foot in this reality and another foot in a totally different one.
Mm.
Like I was walking around in this liminal space. And it was really the beginning of my healing journey, too. Um, and the kind of illusion of who I thought I was started to break down. So it was a lot of like shedding, a lot of letting go, a lot of starting to see things very clearly, kind of as they are. A lot of facing emotions and experiences that I had ignored because I had shut myself off from that realm. And I ended up just having this strong force almost just pushing me forward. So I started talking about it to almost anybody who would listen to me. I would share my experience. I was like, oh my God. And by talking about it, it's like I would learn more little pieces. I would get more clarity. I would figure out something by just talking about it with other people. And then I started, slowly moving into more kind of metaphysical spaces, getting curious, being like, okay, like what does that space have to offer? What's in there? I started reading a lot of books. I started trying to understand, okay, there's other people who have been in this space other than me. Let's figure out what they have to say. Um, and it felt like at every kind of step along the journey, someone would show up and give me something that I needed to hear to move me on to the next step. And as I did it, I became more and more sensitive. Like as I kept going along that journey, I started like the world at one place felt very overwhelming. Like I was getting so much sensory information that I was like, whoa,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
this is a lot.
Mm.
Um, and so it felt like to me, my more spiritual gifts, that realm had been kind of opened and they were turned all the way to 10. And then I had to kind of learn and figure out, okay, how do I hold that and also be a physical human being at the same time?
Yeah. I'm glad that you take that up because it's something that I frequently experience, and and yeah, I mentioned emotional management before, but we could talk about energetic management. And I've noticed that sometimes when I've been doing a lot of the spiritual practice that I do with energy, that I tend to be more annoyed when there are noise, for example, where I live. And there's noises, and I'm like, ah! And I'm like, man, why are you so upset about it right now, right? As opposed to another time where maybe wouldn't notice. So that's really interesting. But did you find a way to shield you, or do you think it is something a returning issue when you work with subtle energies?
Well, in my experience, I learned how to be with it.
Uh-huh.
And there are ways to protect our energy. And I would say, emotions are energy in motion. So it's all energy, right? So you
Right.
learn how to emotionally regulate, you learn how to energetically regulate.
Yeah, same. Yeah.
Yep. And it's about feeling like you're the one in control versus being bombarded by things. So, kind of in some ways, learning when to kind of shield yourself or close that energy off just a little bit, right? Or opening it all the way up with intention so that you can really kind of go into that space and take it all in.
Right. Okay, so I that was a little of a sidetrack there, because you were telling your story and how you were piecing it together from sharing it with people.
Mm-hmm.
But when in an email to you, I was asking if you had anyone who's a book that inspired you, and you said actually, honestly, no,
Mm-hmm.
which I
Mm-hmm.
thought was funny. That there was so, but there have been pieces along the way that have inspired you, but at this moment, it's like there's not anyone out there that you feel is actually talking about what you're experiencing. Is that how it is, or?
I think for me, at least, my experience with it is always evolving and kind of changing and growing. So I can connect with pieces or elements of what other people talk about or bring in, but I've never really found anything that is exactly my experience.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, there are like these little threads from books that I've read, either a quote or a phrase that, like, oh, that has reverberated something inside my body. And now I'm going to dive into my body and really figure out what's that. Right. Um, but yeah, the deeper that I've moved into my practice, the more I've kind of learned that maybe we get to a place where, for a time, we have to dive really deep inside of ourselves, dive into our past lives, dive into um, the hidden realms within ourselves, because that is actually where we need to go instead of looking externally for something.
Right. Okay. I think I understand now. Yeah, I think it's because for me, I've been opened up by books because of that same background as you, where the reading was like school was completely under prioritized and the Bible was, yeah, emphasized as the only thing. So I think for me, books has just, whoa, widened my perspective. But it makes sense when you put it like that, because then there's also, yeah, the inner room to start reading that, actually. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think we all have the path that is right for us. So your path may be that more book space, like the
Absolutely.
images come into you and land that way. And I think for me, it's more of the somatic space.
Yeah.
Like I'm always in a state of feeling. And when I read books, I'm a little halfway out of that feeling space. But sometimes there's a word or a phrase or something that then pops me back into my body. And then for me, I'm like, okay, I really want to explore this feeling. Like what is going on in there?
Yeah, I'm smiling because it resonates so much with your birth chart. So, I mean, astrology is also a way of attuning to energy, right? Just
Mm-hmm.
as it's described in the planetary positions. So that you're always, did you say I'm always in a state of feeling? Did you say that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's because you have a really big fourth house. Is just what I'm thinking of right now, and that is the raw emotions. But let's go. That's it's. We'll go to that in a little bit.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, it's just I couldn't help myself. That's really great. But okay, so
I
yeah.
want to
Mm,
just say something
mm,
that I've never had my birth chart read before. I've had people offer, but the feeling was never right. And so when you reached out, I had the feeling like, oh yeah, this is the person who's supposed to tell me this.
Oh, I'm so honored by that. And it has really been fun to look at. Yeah, in lack of a better word. I mean, but of course, the symbol it can mean different things. Should we go there now then?
Yeah, let's go there.
Okay, let's go there now. Well, I did text you that this is the chart of an artist, because you have a lot in what I call the second quadrant, and you are Leo, so that, and that can have different outcomes. What does that mean to be an artist? But it certainly means being very productive and someone who doesn't let go until the job is done, because it's really important to have this personal touch to what you do. So that's actually a big part of the artistic side. Then whatever you do with it, that's different for people. But when it's a chart of an artist, it's really personal and creative.
Mm-hmm.
And then is it okay I just continue, and you'll just just make the hand sign of timeout if it's too much. Okay, so but you have this interesting little stellium. I think maybe we only say stellium if it's 4 or more planets, but you have 3 planets, and that's a lot in Virgo. And Mars is there in Virgo, and so I'm interpreting this in the context of your whole chart. And the whole chart, of course, shows a plurality of lives and characters, but just to tune in on something that potentially is violent and related to past lives, let's focus on what the chart focuses on, because you have a huge 4th house with Mars there, and a whole lot of planets, including the Sun, including Jupiter, Mercury, Venus. And so what I get from that is that the imprinting of past lives has to do with a severe trauma around family, or it could be something very emotional, but probably your tribe, probably the religion of the tribe, and the customs and the rituals. And actually also family members, perhaps land, physical property, were destroyed and were savaged, something quite brutal. And you had to survive that. And you had to overcome that wound that it gave you. And it touched you, of course, in a very vulnerable place inside of you. And it suggests that you recovered in a past life from these difficult family dynamics, whatever it was that happened, and you got to a safe place. And that was the mission, to get to that safe place in the world. And in this life, it has created a really strong need to protect what is most vulnerable in you. To be safe, to be around people who are safe to your nervous system, and to not let anyone force their beliefs on you, to not let anyone silence your expression. Of course, we can then in the beginning do that to ourselves, because that is what it means when something is imprinted in us unconsciously from probably a succession of lives with this theme. So yeah, of course there is that remembrance, and it can take a while, and it should take a while before you can just trust anyone to come into your private sphere, because that is very intimate for you to have someone that close. But it is when you have that trust, then it is possible, and then it is very wonderful to be that close. And it also gives you the capacity to deal with the deepest wounds of yourself and others, because you are so attuned to that space. of vulnerability, and it shows a rise from the deep places into power as you live and mature and align to a higher force. And that Virgo quality, it's the battle to make things right. And I also hear you said that your parents, what you came from, was very worried about what is right and wrong. So it also shows that, but in the positive sense, and in the useful sense. Now useful is also a Virgo word, is that you're really empowered to restore anything that you want, anything that you put your mind to, from scratch to full potency, because in Virgo there are so many skills and there's so much wisdom around how to fine-tune things. And so you develop skills to do that. And it's this productive, like I said, and it's an enduring quality. But then there's this fourth house quality that we have to read into it too. It's slow. I love that. It's slow. So slow because of the fourth house, strategic also because of the Virgo. So it's planned rather than just doing a shortcut. You'd rather like plan it. And then again, the fourth house is also wanting to go together with someone. And then the Virgo is also wanting to use tools. For example, to fight an illness would be a classic thing for this. And I guess in your practice you would put it like that, but people do come with whatever they have of problems. So you want to have as much as possible in your toolbox so that you can say, I've tried anything. Like you want to have done all that you could to really achieve your service. And because this is about vocation and management of resources, management of health and hygiene, and in the end, because of the polarity to Pisces, also about your relationship to existence, your relationship to life, and how that development of skills is a rise to power and authority. And so this is the last bit I'm going to say, but for the last around 10 years, Neptune has been opposing those Virgo planets. I mean, it's not stood still for 10 years, but it's passing over your Virgo planets for 10 years actually. Yeah. And that has really been the invitation to bring your skills into the whole, into public resonance. So it makes sense that within the last 10 years, there's been the unpacking of all of those skills that is about curing and applying, finding a cure and applying the cure, taking care of the body and helping others to do that as well. So how does that resonate with you, all of this?
Well, I feel just like my heart has been burst open in a good way. Yeah, feeling just like a lot of emotions listening to you say that, because a lot of it feels very true. And I had a kind of a psychic reader kind of tell me that there has been a lot of trauma in my past lives, and really connected to me being a witch in a past life and having that horrific experience. And like even just reflected in my kind of own life, like the lineage of my own family, there's a lot of intergenerational trauma, like horrific trauma. Um, and so I feel very seen by that recognition that I can endure a lot because I have had to endure a lot. And the words that come to me are like, okay, so what do we do with this hurting? Right? So instead of being crashed, like smashed by it or becoming a victim to it, it's like, okay, what do I have to learn from this experience? And the tools, yeah, like I early on in my spiritual journey, I felt like people were, because I was open, people were coming to me seeking help for things that I really didn't have tools to help them with. I would, it was like I could see the end point, but I couldn't help them along the journey. And that's part of why I went to graduate school because it was like, I need to learn some tools here. I need to figure out how to talk about this with someone, how to have that one foot in reality or this kind of plane of existence. And, this other one can be happening too, but learning how to bridge those two worlds together. And a huge part of it is that I don't offer a tool that has not worked on myself.
That is a good rule of thumb.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That you have to have had some help from it before you share it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, it just even the thing you shared about having these visions and seeing what you did as a child, that is really, for me, evidence that it's related to a past
Mm-hmm.
where you did that. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and then all of that intergenerational trauma. Yeah, probably related to what you did with witches at that time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you feel any threat around that anymore? Because there was an obvious threat being a child, being told we don't do this. But what?
Mm-hmm.
But now we have a society, right? And you have a normal day job, as I understand it.
Mm-hmm.
So, is there a threat to bringing this side forth?
Yeah, and I think I've been working through that thread. I remember when I was naming my podcast, I was in such knots about like, oh, like, am I really gonna say it? Am I really gonna say it? And I just ripped the band-aid off and was like, yeah, I'm gonna say it. Like,
It is the coolest name. I mean, I just don't forget that podcast name.
mhm.
It's like,
But it's it's kind of this experience that I had where it was during a solstice many years ago, and I was in a ritual with a group of people, and I said, I am releasing fear that no longer serves me. And it's been a couple years of being on that journey. And I noticed that when I have a fear, I do my very best to work through it and release it. And it's really difficult. Some people call it the witch wound or whatever, but I definitely have that feeling in my throat
okay.
where sometimes it is so impossible for me to talk.
Yeah.
Um, and it's really difficult for me most of the time to speak about my spiritual experiences. Like there is this very kind of threatening ooh, part of it. And I think for me, it's about, okay, doing just a little bit at a time, like speaking a little bit and and then recognizing nothing bad's happening. Letting it out a little bit and having the experience of actually pretty good things starting to happen. People who aren't judging it or being critical or attacking me for it, but actually like, oh my God, thank you for saying this. And I think many of us, especially when we're in this embodiment as a female embodied person, that's perceived in our external world as a woman, that wound, that kind of noose around the neck, whether you identify as a witch or not, there is something profoundly unsafe about us speaking from our truth and from our power.
We share that because you are 2 Chiron generations after me. You are a Chiron in Leo, but you have it in the 3rd house, which is the house of communication, and I have it in Gemini, which is the sign of communication. So I really resonate a lot with that, being afraid to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But in your chat, and as I hear you say that when you have experiences, then doing it, it's successful in a way, and that is what is suggested by this chart, is that it is a rise to power, and it is a rise into authority and some kind of mastery over the occult, I'll say. Yeah, with your
Mm-hmm.
North Node in the 8th house, if people want to know what I'm talking about. And so it's not that long ago that you had your Saturn return. It's one of the dates that I sent you, but this one you said there was nothing really happening around that time. So, but then sometimes a Saturn return is just like a process, and you'll realize it afterwards. But your Saturn is in the 9th house, that is around truth and learning, higher learning. So I'm thinking that the more that you know what to say, the easier it gets, because maybe it's been blocked also because you were not sure what to say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's just an idea from that Chiron opposing Saturn in the 9th house. Yeah.
That feels really true to me. And for me, knowing it's a feeling. It's not so much a cognitive thing. And there's a place that I can get where I'm not actually thinking at all when I talk. And that is when my throat opens up and I don't experience a whole lot of resistance or tightening or this like kind of burning uh, lump in my throat. But it's like if the words are coming from the bottom up,
Right.
it's very easy. But if I try to go from the top down, I stutter.
Yeah.
I am even slower than I am now. It's like
Yeah, I mean, that speaking from that tense place, it's just not fun for anyone. Not the listeners or the speaker.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
Okay, so I have a couple of more questions, and then you'll get to relax. But there's a few more questions. But that's actually what we're talking about: relaxing while we're speaking, while we are in a way performing, while we hope that someone is listening to us anyway. Relaxing during. And my question is around the merging of magic and mental health. And I just feel like exploring what you just said around relaxation, because that is something that is, I find again and again in different spiritual practices, that there is at least an ingredient of relax, no relax even more, no deeper.
Mhm.
So do we have any thoughts about that in terms of mental health?
Yeah, so just to bring in the more psychological perspective here is that there's something called window of tolerance. And I don't really connect to tolerance as a word, so I use the window of presence. And it's not just like idea, it's actually a place in our nervous system. So this is when our nervous system is free to do the rest and digest. And we have a somatic experience of safety where it's very easy for us to connect with other people. We can be socially engaged, right? And it's the absence of threat. And I think when in spiritual places, when they're like, oh, relax, what they're really trying to achieve is that window of presence. Can you get to a place where you are not having some low grade feeling of threat, that, oh, the tiger's going to come around at any moment. I got to kind of be prepared for it. And there's a very different feeling when two nervous systems are able to commune with each other from that totally safe space. That's where we actually feel into that authentic, real connection. And in somatics, we call it ventral vagal to ventral vagal, when my nervous system is open, calm, and secure and safe. And yours is too. We're not having to manage each other at all. And when we're in that space, so much stuff starts to open up that we normally don't have access to.
So almost magic. I mean, somatic magic. I mean, don't you feel that being a therapist is that you constantly have to, yeah, I mean, it's good that you're always in that feeling body of yours, because it takes some awareness to be in that relaxed space with whatever client comes in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on the field. And to be just very transparent, I'm still pretty new as a therapist. Like, I'm not yet licensed, I'm working on it. But I think why so many people find connection is kind of all the things you've kind of highlighted in my chart, where, in a way, I kind of think that what we talk about doesn't really matter. Like, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what happened to you. What matters is, can you sit here and feel into safety?
Yeah.
Can you tolerate someone that's actually not overwhelmed by your experience, that's not judging you, that's not going, oh God, how many minutes do I have until I have to go to another person, but being like 100% and totally present with you. And in a way, allowing that magical realm of the nervous system to be doing the work. And if I can achieve that, those times when I truly feel like I'm witnessing someone having the most horrible time of their day, they're talking about something incredibly traumatic. And the kindest and most helpful thing I can do for that person is to stay calm and regulated inside myself.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes very hard to do that.
Okay, I'm glad that you mentioned that. That you acknowledge that it is difficult because we want to help. But yeah, that is the kindest thing, that you are in contact with yourself and your own. I'm aware of time, so I just feel like finding the most important question, and I think it is around. You had this mention that it's new to you, and just so you know, from where I am at, I don't care about, and I'm even having reactions to against the external judgment of, when are you this or that, because I think all of the evaluations are not, necessary, but also not even very solid. I don't know if you know what I'm trying to say here. What does it even prove that you've taken all of this? What is giving you credit to do something is more of what we've spoken about, is, are you showing up? That's just my assessment. But anyway, so you mentioned that, and then you said in the beginning that you are not sure about the word therapist yet. You may be more of a guide. What do you see for yourself in terms of doing therapy? How do you feel about it? And where does this with guide come in?
You're entering a very special interest of mine. So if I start going off the rails, reel me back in.
Yeah.
But to start, what is the word, psychology? Broken down, it means the study of the soul. And within that is the myth of Psyche, a mortal who went into the underworld, went to literal hell and back, and then became a goddess of herself. And so Psyche and Eros, right? Like goddess of the soul, and then Eros, goddess of that love, they join together, and their daughter is Harmony. And so I'm constantly holding that myth as like, this is the journey of psychology.
Eros, soul, harmony.
Yeah. And so we talk about it in psychology a lot, Eros, like some people call it unconditional positive regard. But really what we're talking about is the thing that actually helps people is the feeling of love. It's the energy of love. And as children, we have to be loved into being. And there's a huge wound that happens when you're not. And I think for me, the more that I bring myself into this work, the more that is what feels like is happening, is that we are co-creating a space where a person can feel loved. And when that force, that magical energy is there, they're able to experience who they actually are. Like you're not this broken person who is stuck in Hades, who's, never going to get out. Like you're actually a divine being. And that's why I feel like the word guide makes so much more sense, because everybody's on this journey. It's the same one. And we all have to go through the swamp. We all have to go climbing up that hill that nobody wants to do. And yet we need someone to do it with us. And we need someone who's done it before themselves so that they're not afraid as it's happening. They don't get stuck in the mud with us. But a person's like, hey, yeah, we might have to sit in the mud for a while because that might be what you need, but we're not going to be here forever. And it's not about fixing people. It's about guiding people to their own medicine inside themselves. And to me, that's magical.
Yeah. Yeah, wow. And I mentioned finding the cure or something before, and now I hear you saying guiding people to find their own medicine within themselves. It's definitely the higher version of Virgo that you're tapped into and that you're living out, because I assume that since you mentioned it, you also know the lower version, which is about fixing, right? Fixing every little detail. And so when that is turned around, then that can be useful in certain situations, but then actually to look at people as they don't need to be fixed. That's, I mean, it sounds maybe basic, but when you sit as a therapist, it's like an impulse that can come up. A helping impulse. So it's really important. Yeah.
And it happens even for people who aren't therapists. It's a normal response when we're in the presence of suffering. Fixing energy isn't really you want to help that person. It's that you don't want to feel that. So if you fix them, you don't have to feel uncomfortable being around them. And then it's like, it's never really then about them, huh? You're not actually fixing them. You're just trying to avoid a feeling inside of yourself. So then when you switch it over of like, okay, if I have that fixing energy inside of myself, it's not actually about the other person. It's something about me.
Yeah. It's so beautiful. Like, it's because that is what I mean, that it's an ongoing self work being a therapist, because you constantly have to be aware, oh, I did that again where I thought it was about you, but this is about me.
And there's this like parallel process. And, within the realm of therapy, magical things happen where like there'll be times when I am just in my own suffering, where I am just like, like, oh God, another growth moment, you know. And when I'm in that state, I'm aware that with my clients, we're not really progressing. Like sometimes I call it like we're just in the swamp. We're just kind of swamping it. It's muggy. It's gross. Nobody really wants to be here. We're like, oh, why can't it just change? And often when I return to myself and go, okay, there's something for me to process. There's something for me to discover. The self journey continues inside myself. And once I do my work, then something magical happens with the client. The aha moment happens. We're no longer in the swamp.
Yeah. That is sort of magic, isn't it? It is. Yeah. I think that's why it fascinates me so much, because there's so many layers to it and things that can happen because I work on myself or don't work on myself, relax or whatever. Yeah. Elizabeth, it is almost time. So I want to just take, because I have this is a ritual. My witch ritual is to take a screenshot while the listeners are hearing us. This is my ritual, and then also I want to ask if you had anything else in your heart that you maybe want to share. Just, it's nice to get everything out there.